Hi guys, my name is Narissa Anderson and this is my timeline of special education. So my timeline will start in 1817, where it talks about the first special education school in the United States, which was a American asylum for education and instruction of the deaf and dumb, as they called it. This school is now called the American School for the Deaf. It was established in Connecticut by someone by the name of Gallaudet. Um, special education programs were provided in many asylums after this. Children were judged as delinquent and aggressive that went here, and the adults were considered mad if they went there. Um, the followers of this asylum believe that the individuals with disabilities would end their abuse and that it would help them with the treatment. The treatment would help them. And so this was the first school created in the United States for anybody who was considered special ed. They went into the asylums at this time. In around 1823, Kentucky they created the first school for deaf people in 1823, and in other states they began to establish schools for the deaf and blind as well. In 1850, beginning with the education for the deaf and blind, it increased and it evolved, and it helped the mentally deficient and physically crippled by the 1930s. So they started to help those who couldn't walk and who were in wheelchairs, etc. In 1852, I'm sorry, let me go back. In 1852, we have the state of Pennsylvania who gave the funding to private schools to start educating mentally retarded children. And um, back in the days, they referred to the children as retarded. Now they say special education. I believe retarded is a very harsh word. And so, for source reasons, and I put retarded, but I would say special education. Also, during this time, President Abraham Lincoln signed the bill that created the Gallaudet College, which was an institution of higher learning for the deaf. Um, in 1869, Boston established the first public school for the deaf. Um, Towards the end of the century, Rhode Island established classes for mentally retarded children in Chicago, Illinois. Um, I'm sorry, and Chicago, Illinois established classes for the physically handicapped and the blind. So two different states which established classes for different types of special ed students. Going into the 1900s, in New York, the Board of Education established special undergrad classes for students who were unable to progress in regular classes. So, right now, we're talking about minor kids, children who are still considered special ed, but just a little behind in their learning skills. It was 125 classes established during this time, and about 2,000 students were cared for in these classes. In 1933, the first advocacy groups to fight for quality special education were made up of parents whose children were marginalized. The majority of these parents began waves in the 1950s when their lobbying encouraged the passage of laws that provided training for teachers who worked with deaf and the hard of hearing or intellectually disabled students. Um, Historically, like I said, it's called mentally retarded, but now they had toned down on that, and then now they use special education, which is a better term for that. In 1990, the EHA was reformulated as the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is the IDA, which is really big nowadays. The IDEA elaborates on the inclusion of children with disability into regular classes and also focuses on rights of parents to be involved in education decisions. As we talked about earlier in our class, in our first week's module, IDEA consists of a lot of things, such as how students are placed in special education classes, the level that they will be at, the parent support, the different accommodations, and etc. In 1997, IDEA was reauthorized. Um, this act emphasized academic outcomes for students with disabilities, like I was saying, raising expectations for students, supporting students who follow the general curriculum, supporting parents, and helping states determine appropriate outcomes, helping them determine what is best for the student. In 2009, the No Child Left Behind Act, NCLB, provided further accountability to schools and added technology assistance and loan programs to help schools acquire needed special education resources. During this time, there was a lot of students who needed technology to help them get by in the classes. They learned better using technology. So in 2009, this act was created to help that. And lastly, in 2015, to end today, and this is recent, so I wouldn't say 2017, but 2015, the majority of students with disabilities are now served in general education. As we embrace inclusive practices in our schools, there is now a stronger call for special education. And it's more broad and it's more out there now, and it's a lot of resources for students as well as implements that are there so that all children get what they need, and also that we have the educators for them. Um, the one thing that we can all take for granted in special education is that change is a constant, but those change is a constant. But those of us who work with students with disabilities are resilient and quick to respond with meaningful action. Um, in the next 20 years, I think education will be communicated, presented, interacted with, and demonstrated with greatly accessibility. Individual strengths and styles will be embraced more openly, which I agree with. Um, I think it will expand and strengthen educational support and quality programs and services for every student with special needs. I think it will allow us to appreciate the fact that each citizen, including individual with disabilities, has a right to participate and contribute meaningfully to the society. Um, that's about it for my timeline. I think special education is growing as far as getting the resources out there and making sure um, parents as well as the students are successful. Um, I think being a special education educator, it's really important that we make sure that our students have everything they need in order to succeed.